When Sarah and I were talking about Sarah Thrive a million years ago, the idea was that different wavelengths would penetrate at different levels and have different therapeutic influences at different levels in the body. The lower wavelengths would certainly be more influential on the surface, whereas the higher wavelengths can go deeper to get down there and stimulating actual neuronal activity. Combining them has so many interesting and compelling opportunities and possibilities.
Breaking the gray.
Welcome back to the Rebel Scientist podcast. I'm your host, Chantel, joined by my wonderful co-host, Sarah Turner, Rebel Scientist herself. And today we are so honored to be hosting Dr. Marvin Berman, a trailblazer in neurofeedback and photobiomodulation. Hi.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
It's so lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you. We don't get to hang out as much. You're so busy wandering all over the planet.
That's right. Yes, I know. So maybe on that note, you could kind of catch us up with what you've been doing, because I know that you've kind of had some changes and you're kind of powering ahead with Quiet Mind and all the other things you've been doing. So let's catch up since the last time we spoke, because
okay. Well,
since the last episode. Yeah.
Let's see. Where were we when last we were trying to entertain each other? Neuronic and all of that was happening. The Neuradiant was developed and out there on the market. I am now working through the foundation, through Quiet Mind specifically, and gathering all of the resources together to continue the research and the development of the next phase in the development of what I have been setting out to do these many years, which was to create that closed loop model of treatment that would take some measure of brain electrical activity, some measure of cardiovascular heart rate variability activity, put those two together in an algorithm that would then drive the delivery of the lights. And so we're further along in the thinking about that and also in the development of the technology. One of the things I think that's significant in that it's taken quite a while in the arc of development is the issue of discriminating between the different wavelengths and their impact. And I know you and I have had this conversation, many times, but here now, some of the big players like V-Light and Weber and Titan IR and a couple of other places where people are starting to actually combine 1070 and 810 together in the same device. And Sarah Thrive was a leader in that. Thank you. But, we were ahead of that curve for all sorts of reasons. But now some other players are coming along and seeing that maybe there really is a point to the different wavelengths where we're way far away from understanding how best to organize and deliver that stimulation. But be that as it may, we're now in the ballpark of having multiple wavelengths, and working through how best to deliver those wavelengths to optimize results, which is terrific. The one bit that I keep talking about with people is the idea that maybe 810 may have something more to do with cell viability, whereas the 1064, 1070 certainly seems to have more to do with neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. So it then only stands to reason, put them together.
Yeah.
How that's going to happen, how to optimize that, I hope, I'm still around to see, the next phase of that development. But that's what I'm particularly interested in now, and being able to mount some studies and some device development within the U.S. for reasons that everybody is probably aware of. Well, it started at 145%, but as of yesterday, I think we're only down to 30% tariff.
we've got a little reprieve. I don't know how long it will last. We have a small reprieve.
Right. This is definitely one of those circumstances where you want to remember the phrase, don't hold your breath.
Yes, exactly. And quickly get stuff in while you can.
Quickly do stuff. Yeah.
But Marvin, just to kind of just to give a little bit of background on that, what you were talking about there is like the 810, 850, which is near infrared light, but slightly shorter wave.
Yes.
Compared to, we're saying longer wave, but it's really relative, but longer wave red light, which is like 1050 to 1070, it's around about there. And what you're saying really is potentially we're looking at different chromophores for those different wavelengths.
And how the system responds, especially, when you start talking about structured water, how do those different wavelengths influence the structured water, maybe even more than the mitochondria?
Yeah, for sure.
Mitochondria are, pretty old and set in their ways. What is it, 25 million? 45 million? It's a lot of million years.
8 billion. 8 billion years or something.
They're kind of rigid little buggers, right? It's
like on that with the wavelengths, maybe you could also give a little bit of an explanation of why it's useful for somebody. Obviously, it depends on what the person's dealing with, to use different wavelengths together at the same time. Like why wouldn't you do just 1070 or vice versa?
Certainly when Sarah and I were talking about Sarah Thrive a million years ago, the idea was that different wavelengths would penetrate at different levels and have different therapeutic influences at different levels in the body. And so the lower wavelengths would certainly be more influential on the surface, whereas the higher wavelengths can go deeper and maybe stimulate pyramidal neurons, which are about 1 to 3, 4 centimeters into the cortex. So to get down there and stimulating actual neuronal activity, you need a longer wavelength. But combining them has so many interesting and compelling opportunities and possibilities that it's just great that we now have something, A, that combines 4 different wavelengths, and B, is flexible enough to be anywhere on the body and has different pulse rates, because we haven't even gotten into the whole idea of pulsing. Don't get me started.
I was about
to... we were about to get you started, Marvin.
Yep.
All right.
Really, I think this is probably a lot of what you bring to the table for photobiomodulation, because you have studied brainwaves and monitoring brainwaves for a long time, and written many papers on it. Yeah. So I wonder if you could kind of, what is your opinion on post near infrared? Because I think, again, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's actually happening when you're pulsing the near infrared light in these devices.
It was something that came out of the research that we were doing on mirror neurons and the whole idea of biofeedback. And biofeedback has 2 dimensions to it, one of which is the peripheral, where you're measuring peripheral activity, skin temperature, conductance, muscle contract, things like that, or central biofeedback, which is the EEG, the brain electrical activity, or blood flow in the brain. What became apparent was that stimulating activity of any kind would bring you a response in the EEG based on the pulse rate of whatever it is you were doing somewhere else. So that's where we saw that if you pulsed light, you could see changes in the EEG from pulsing light on your palm. So from that, I got the notion that we could start to influence brain activity, maybe with light, because I saw that we were able to influence brain activity with electrical stimulation. I mean, that's what audio visual entrainment, that's what binaural beats is. If you know that you can pulse 10 hertz here and 14 hertz here, and your brain starts to produce 12, then you know that there's an interpretation going on in the brain in response to the actual stimulation being delivered.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's auditory pulsing, but everything's electromagnetic anyway, including light. So it just seemed reasonable to say, wait, if you pulse light on the scalp, you should get some kind of a response. In 2017, I had the opportunity to take a live subject with a traumatic brain injury at the International Society for Neurofeedback and Research in Denver, and I got them to sit in the front of the room. We put an open EEG cap. It was just the cables and the electrodes. It was just an open net.
Mm-hmm.
We then measured their EEG and displayed it on the big screen, so everybody could see what the activity pattern was. Then we overlaid on top of that an avatar that would show the propagation of alpha, 10 hertz, show the propagation of alpha as it occurred in the EEG. We then ran that for a couple of minutes. Then we flipped on the V-Light 10 hertz alpha LEDs, and you saw immediately a slow propagation of alpha across the entire scalp. And it was great because it was like being in the movie theater when people watched Neo dodging the bullets, and everybody kind of went, whoa, right? That's what happened in the audience. All the people in the audience were like, whoa, when they saw the alpha going up. Then when we shut the V-Light off, there was a very slow attenuation.
Right.
And everybody in the room was just like, oh, wow. And it was like, and I said from the stage, I said, okay, we're now done with this whole idea of does light influence the EEG, right? That's over. Now, can we please get on with optimizing what that means? And how are we going to capitalize and leverage that? Mm-hmm. Because I don't have that answer. You don't have that answer, but we all, like a heart attack, need that answer.
So that really is the next question. What does it mean? What is the brain actually doing when we're having these brainwaves? Because we know that the brain is coordinating its kind of electrical firing using these patterns and flows. Yep. So when we have a device that is enabled to make the brain or kind of entrain the brain into, say, for example, your example of 10 hertz frequency.
Or whatever
we're looking to do, why would we want to do that?
So, because of the field of neurofeedback, we were uniquely positioned to be able to address that question. Mm-hmm. Because quantitative EEG has normative information, normative database information, such that we can make individual comparisons to a normative database broken out by age and gender. So because I know what normal brain activity looks like in a gross, normative sense, I can then take an individual recording of, say, 19 different locations on the scalp, simultaneously record them with eyes open and eyes closed, or even under specific task conditions. I can then compare that individual's data against the average of those readings for people who are, say, 1 or 2 years above or below that person and who are the right gender. Given that I can do that, any number of analyses that we can then perform and look at statistically to see how each individual area of the brain is performing, but also to then look at the network connectivity, because we're looking at the electrical connectivity in the brain. That gives us an entirely different perspective than an MRI or a PET or, fMRI. Any of those are snapshots, right? They have no temporal resolution. You can't tell what's going on over time. You can get a picture of what's going on right there and then. The EEG is the only way you get to see how things are going over time.
Interesting, yeah.
So it's a very robust way of looking at what's happening and then being able to intervene plus or minus, depending on what's going on, that's what gave rise to my wanting to create the device, the Neuradiant. And that whole way of thinking, the Neuradiant, now the Neuromatrix, these are devices that now can segment and deliver to different segments of the skull, different wavelength, different frequencies of light at different intensities for different periods of time, and program those to be delivered in a sequence in the same way that we might program a neurofeedback training session. We can now do a photobiomodulation entrainment session to do somewhat the same thing as the neurofeedback. Like I said at the beginning, where we want to end up is where those two things overlap and integrate.
As you're talking about the overlapping and integration, it would be interesting to know how that looks. Are you doing neurofeedback alongside photobiomodulation is that what you're talking about within the devices?
Whenever it's possible and appropriate, yes. If people ask me, what's the best thing to do? I'm going to say functional medicine to clear up the toxicity, photobiomodulation to increase the capacity for the system to tolerate change, and neurofeedback to renormalize connectivity. Speaking
about the frequencies and the pulsing, maybe you can also elaborate on what you've witnessed in terms of, or observed. Maybe it's hard to put it into words with, you talk about how you can see it over time, but is there a way of depicting, certain ages that you're noticing certain patterns happening, and then certain pulsing is important to be integrated? Or is that still, like diet, very individualistic depending on what's happening in the brain?
It is individualistic to a certain degree. However, there are developmental variables that influence what EEG activity predominates at different ages. What I want to be looking at is the overall efficiency of brain activity. So instead of getting granular, and this is something Sarah and I have talked about before, instead of getting granular about what pulse frequency works with what kind of disorder, that's kind of like trying to imitate allopathic medicine and trying to identify the molecule that fits with the receptor. There's all kinds of reasons why I don't think that's such a great way to go, not the least of which is it's unbelievably arrogant to think we know that much. That aside, I think that we are better equipped to address the problems that we're seeing now in certainly in modern first world life, which are predominantly systemic problems. It's not broken bones. It's not snake venom. That's not what we're dealing with anymore, per se. Problems that we're dealing with are systemic. That's why we want to be looking at the problem systemically, figuring out what array of interventions are necessary, to what degree, at what level, and in that way intervene at the system level. What that's going to look like for my way of thinking is that we're trying to provide the system with enough resources so that the inherent intelligence, let's call it that, or the self-organizing and self-correcting capability of our brain and our nervous system, that we give the resources to that system such that it can do the work that it needs to do. It's really that what we try to do by being helpful is we try to intervene and change something for that person. We want to do something to them to make them better. And that still is the 900 plus year old model of, right? You go to the doctor when you're You go to the doctor when you're
sick.
When you get there, you tell the doctor what's wrong. And then you expect that the doctor's gonna
make you better.
Now, I've been doing that little bit for 40 years with everybody that I work with, usually around session 2 or 3, at least 95% of the time. I don't want to say 100, but 95% of the time, those are the 3 answers. Now, that indicates the thickness of the conditioning in Western civilization. That's how thick the conditioning is across all demographics, irrespective of any demographic you want. Those are the three answers that come out, because for 900 years, that's been the deal.
Yeah.
Doctor as God, doctor, father, all that stuff. Psychoanalysis aside, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And so this idea of returning authority to the person, to their own innate intelligence, to support and sustain their own wisdom about how to heal, it means that what we first need to do is provide the resources that the system needs in order for the system to make use of whatever the next thing is we offer. Whether it's light therapy, psychotherapy, transcranial direct current, TMS, TUS, fill in the alphabet soup, it doesn't matter, because any one of those interventions is introducing a difference into the system. And the introduction of a difference means that we're making an inherent demand on the system to change. However, we already know that we're dealing with an inherently dysregulated and therefore inefficient system. So it's already working. I know it's a guy metaphor, but the idea of being a quart low. Yeah,
being
good. A quart low.
Oh, right.
Like you're a quart of oil low in your in the car.
I see. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I'm with you now. Sorry, Marvin.
So the engine is going to immediately run too hot.
Yeah.
And burn up. That doesn't sound therapeutic to me.
No. So really what you're saying, I suppose, is because I also see what you're doing is broken down into two things. You have photobiomodulation. I think what you're also talking about is neuromodulation, because like you say, you can do it with light, you can do it with a lot of things.
It doesn't matter.
Necessarily photobiomodulation. Right. And on top of that, you also kind of need to, with the individual, break down this conditioning and kind of give sovereignty back. But maybe in order to do that, you need to get their brain to the capacity to take it on. Because if somebody is kind of oscillating very low, they're perhaps not even able to take that concept on.
To take in that concept is to ask them to take in a difference.
Yes.
To tolerate a difference. So my whole premise has been that what we're trying to do is really offer people an opportunity to organize their energetic economy more efficiently. And if it's cellular metabolism or it's transference and countertransference, which is how I got into this business, but be that as it may, it's all the same thing. It's just that we're now looking at a different level of abstraction in the system and intervening there. And yes, the neuromodulation is pretty close to the zeros and ones. Maybe microtubule therapy could be maybe some, I don't know, but we're pretty close to the zeros and ones at this point. So yes, neuromodulation is really the key. The difference for me, and the reason I went with the light, is because that's the only electromagnetic intervention that is inherently nutritive as well as therapeutic. Yeah. And that's the key. We're providing a direct nutritive intervention to increase the system's capacity to tolerate change. Everything else is introducing change, whether it's gentler or easier or it's still introducing a difference.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also just want to lead on to my next question too, that kind of come from what you're saying. I wanted to ask you in terms of how you support people with making or keeping that change, whatever it is coming to them. But the second one was also you speaking about, this, I think that a lot more people are becoming aware of, well, at least because we're going to events, so it feels like there's more people that are aware of this thing of not just wanting to get to the point where you're having to heal yourself, like sick prevention versus like preventing yourself from like staying healthy versus just getting sick. So my two questions is, how do you support people that when you intervene the change to kind of integrate that change? And then the second one is, if someone doesn't necessarily know whether they have a condition or not, what would
Right.
you say to them to start looking, or where to start looking in order to, either start photobiomodulation or neurofeedback, or look into the psycho?
Let me turn it around. Chantel, what's the first thing you did in your life? The very first thing you did in your life?
Cried. Probably.
Yeah. And in order to cry, breathe.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I impress upon people is, how are you breathing? Right? A, are you breathing? How are you breathing? What is the effect of the way in which you're breathing? What is the effect of that on your nervous system, on your consciousness, right? So more often than not, that's the first thing that we start to think about. And I ask people, just stop and count the number of times you breathe in a minute. In and out equals 1. Just start a clock, count the number of times you breathe in a minute. Do that a couple of times a day, and we'll talk in a week or two, and you'll give me the running average. So we come back and they say, oh, well, I was about 21 breaths a minute. And I say, oh, well, that's about 350% too fast. So what do you think the impact of breathing 350% too fast might be on you? Oh, you know that anxiety that you've been talking about? Oh, that depression that you've been feeling? I wonder what the relationship is between hyperventilation and anxiety and depression. That's square one, right? And the other is, when you inhale, which hole do you use to inhale, right? And what's the difference? Well, if you breathe in through your mouth, you automatically stimulate sympathetic tone, which is the fight-flight response, which means you're basically injecting adrenaline directly into your bloodstream every time you breathe. Now, what might that do to your experience of anxiety and depression? Do you think there might be a relationship there? I do. What do you think? Try to keep it at that very, very basic level. The other part of it, from a psychological point of view, because I'm the authority figure, my name is in the middle part of the check, not in the bottom right. So with that in mind, I say, while I'm talking to you, are you breathing? Oh, no. Really? So when might you have learned to stop breathing when the authority figure was talking to you? Chantel, are you listening to me?
Yes.
Yes.
You stopped. You stopped instantly. That's what happened.
No, just wait.
That's what happened to everybody. We all went through that. Are you paying attention? Yeah, that. So how we've learned to take in information from authority figures, how we've learned to interact with the external environment. Well, when did that start?
Yeah, it starts.
And how much of that did we take in before we had anything called language? It's pre-verbal. So these are very, very basic, very, very fundamental experiences that contribute fundamentally to what we're talking about and what we're experiencing in terms of dysregulation.
I mean, this raises some interesting points, Marvin, because you have a lot of experience. When you're talking to people, you're looking out for some of these non-verbal cues. I mean, I've done it in your clinic before, where we've kind of like done, how are you moving? You know, because of that. What do you think about this kind of move away from maybe seeing somebody in a clinic to kind of doing everything offline, where you've really got no guidance? Because I think that for some people who are dealing with fairly, incalcitrant things that don't seem to go, maybe that's what they're missing, is someone to guide them through.
And that's why I was so glad that you wanted to incorporate coaching.
Yes. Because
to me, even if what you're doing is biohacking and you're just wanting to improve and optimize your functioning, that's great. And that's why, there were the preset programs so people could just play around with the experience. But if you've got a diagnosis or you've got an issue that's really, troubling and influencing your quality of life, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Then it's like, the phrase winging it.
Yes. Yeah.
This is not the point where you wing it.
Yeah.
And winging it also means, going into these chat groups and throwing up a question to whoever on the planet feels like answering. It's like, and that's why I'm in those Facebook groups going, are you sure you want to just take people's advice?
Yeah.
I mean, photobiomodulation is relatively safe. So no, you're probably not going to hurt yourself, but you're not here to avoid hurting yourself, are you? Like, that's not why you wrote this note. You wanted to produce a result.
Mm.
Well, then maybe you want to talk to somebody,
Yeah. Get professional advice. Yeah.
Something, and it's like, and maybe you want to get some real, honest to God, empirically validated measures and assessments of what's actually going on there that is non-invasive, doesn't require radioactive gook being injected into you, or any of that. Just, like in half an hour, we can, have the data that we need with you just sitting there with your eyes open and closed for 10 minutes. I think that's a more grounded, again, way of approaching things.
Obviously, Sarah and I have spoken lots, and I know what we sort of know from research of telling people, like, how much is too much, because that's the question people always want to know, is also like, how much is too much. And even when I started using Zero Thrive, it's like you get really excited, or you get, if your throat or your tummy and like all these things. I'd be curious to know if you could explain a little bit more to us also what happens in the system to where it like clocks off and doesn't want anymore.
Certainly.
We're going to get a demonstration.
Having one of these.
What is that?
The pulse oximeter.
Oh, right. Okay. Is that oxygen saturation?
It's upside down, isn't it?
You're doing good, Marvin. We won't call the ambulance yet. You're doing good. You're on 97.
You're looking good.
Yeah.
You're breathing.
You're looking good.
So here we've been talking, and I'm at 96, 97, which is pretty good for an old character. And, I'm at 63 beats a minute. So what we can see is that as people do the stimulation, we could have an immediate response to something like this. We could also have an immediate response to heart rate variability, right?
Yeah.
Vagal tone. The experience, it takes a certain interoceptive capability to notice your body dropping, to feel you're responding to gravity. That's more sensitive, but some people are. It's really important that people recognize that photobiomodulation and neuromodulation therapy is not American capitalism, right? More is not inherently better.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to, again, introduce that difference in a way that is supportive. I take people through dizzy, sleepy, headache, irritable, anxious, congested. Those are the 6 things that I suggest people start to become aware of when they're doing.
If you have, is that an indicator that you might be using too much?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So those are pretty commonly understandable words that go with an internal experience that most people can relate to.
Yeah, no, that's great, because obviously it is very individual. Maybe the thing that would be most useful then, Marvin, is if you could just go through what a consultation with you is like, because I think people would be interested to know, how do you do it? How do you run? Because you've already said, do you send, like, you sit in front and do someone's EEG, but do you send it to them? Do they go to one? How does that?
By feedback and the neurofeedback. Yeah.
If somebody, depending on what somebody brings, right? So the very first thing that I ask people to do is complete an intake form and send it to me. And they can do it online and they can send it in. There's an informed consent document that goes along with using the device. And there's a release of information so that I can interact with whoever they're working with medically or however. other professionals, and we can then start collecting the data. So once I have that, then we can have a conversation where I'll do what I did with you, right? And get them to pay attention to their breathing. And I can see a lot of that. The other thing that we can do, even like this, is Sarah, turn sideways to the camera. So when you went all the way, turn all the way to the camera. Yeah, turn your whole body. Yeah. Right. So when you and look directly straight ahead. See how Sarah's ear is directly above her shoulder.
Yeah.
See how I can draw a line straight down. Sarah's in the top 0.5% of the people on the planet, in my experience. You can come back now. So,
and you've got a baby liver.
You see what I mean? So just looking at someone in terms of how their skeleton is organized in relation to the field of gravity. Right? Because gravity is always 90 degrees to the ground. So if the force of gravity is going through the top of your head and pushing you down onto the ground, if you are properly aligned skeletally, then it takes a minimum amount of effort between the flexors and the extensors to maintain you upright in the field of gravity. To the degree that you're not, you are wasting energy. Because now if you're sitting head forward, right, like all the cardinals who were going into the conclave.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God. Did you see that picture of them walking
out down
and walking past the Swiss guard?
Oh, right.
It was, I wrote a Substack thing on it yesterday with the pictures. There, I showed a picture of Leo, Pope Leo, and then I showed a picture of the cardinals going into the conclave. And it was like, of course they picked him. Look, he's connected. Yeah. Look at them. Up. Forget it.
Yeah.
Right?
Very interesting, actually.
So those are the
saying here, Marvin. I don't know if you have it over there. We say he's straight up or she's straight up.
Yeah, it's really that. It's really that. Yeah. It's really that. The guy's straight up. And clearly he's lived in a third world country and been close to the earth for a very long time.
Yes. Yeah.
It's instantly apparent. Yeah. When you have this perspective, it was instantly apparent and was like, oh no, none of them. Forget that. I want him. Give me that one.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, shout out to Dr. Dan at the Atlas Clinic, because I had a procedure done where he made sure that my Atlas joint was correct because it was a bit wonky and he did an adjustment. So shout out to Dr. Dan.
And Dan, so in answer to the question, what do? I do this, and then I refer people to Dr. Dan or somebody who can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we look at the QEEG and we see this enormous amount of delta activity or high beta activity here, I say, when's the last time you went to the orthodontist?
Mm-hmm.
When's the last time you went to the dentist? Did they put the blue tape in your mouth and make you go so they could see if your bite was even? Because I don't want to interpret that as if it's brainwave activity when it's really teeth grinding.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, why are your teeth grinding?
Yeah.
Oh, my cat died. Oh, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those things need to be parsed out and then intervened on appropriately at the level of abstraction that's appropriate. That's what I think the coaching is really for, is to parse out what needs to get treated and direct, with what.
Yeah, it's looking for your weakest link, literally, isn't it? It's going through, looking for weak links, correcting them, and then helping people use the technology in a way that's really gonna.
Yeah, and not get arrogant or defensive about the fact that, oh wait, this isn't, no, you not this, or not this now, maybe later, but first go from here to here. Maybe photobiomodulation and neurofeedback will help you reestablish that. I certainly can make an argument for that, no problem. But first things first. If you're living on Twinkies, crisps.
Yeah.
No, come on.
Yeah. No, it has to be holistic. I totally agree that the holistic approach is the one, and it's fundamental to get the basics right.
So the practitioners need to be willing to have a Rolodex or an address book of people that they can refer to, which I do all the time, because it needs to be that way. We have to work together, because I only know what I know.
I find your approach really unique as well, because we've spoken to a lot of different types of practitioners, and obviously diet comes into a thing, but
I went to Woodstock,
I really, exactly. Well, your holistic approach, but also the fact that you have had all these different compartments within the brain, like psychotherapy and neurofeedback. Because one question that I obviously also always love asking on the podcast is this thing that you were talking about with, breath work, the nervous system, and also with working with the Sarah Thrive device. And I find it really interesting that people want to ignore that aspect. They want to sometimes just treat whatever's going on. And
tell me what to do. Right. One of the phrases that I very often get into with people is, I know you want me to make the boo-boo go away. I understand.
I'm going to use that line at an event.
I understand you want me, mommy, daddy, to make the boo-boo go away. And on that, I completely understand. However, I'm not mommy. And I can't make the boo-boo go away. And that's sad. There's something to grieve about the fact that my infantile wish cannot be gratified. And that sadness, and being willing to feel that sadness, along with the murderous rage at not getting what I want when I want it. And that to the degree that we don't want to let ourselves feel that, we are going to avoid, without thinking about it, those kinds of interventions that are going to evoke those kinds of feelings. Somebody way smarter than me said, people choose the therapy that works the least.
So they don't have to get better and deal with it.
Right.
So who's the one that just enables you to stay in as long as you're not totally suffering, you can deal with not having to face actually what's going on.
And therefore why the role that we take up needs to inherently be initially supportive of people feeling safe in being able to experience whatever they're feeling and whatever they're experiencing to the full depth of whatever that feeling is. Because whatever part of the sine wave of experience we decide to cut off, right? When we want to cut off the low, we automatically are cutting off part of the high. And we're now living inside what we might call the zone of safety.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're kind of coming to the end and Chantel's got her quick fire, but there's one thing that I would like to discuss with you, because it's something that we've both talked about, and actually just following on from what you've said, is that a lot of times people think that they're going to do a therapy and they're going to be better and everything's going to be all roses. And I know that certainly people who are going through quite severe illnesses, and you and I, I was very fortunate that you invited me to do some data collection on a study with you.
Right.
And actually what we found as people got better, some people were very angry, because all of a sudden you're going from being dependent, which, nobody wants that, but there are upsides. You get fed, you get clothed, you don't have to make decisions, to getting better. And so the transition is not always a smooth one from.
And you were around for that experience where the husband of a woman with dementia started to report how, as she became less demented, one of the things that he was seeing is that she became angry and depressed. And when he finally got through to her, like, what's going on, she was like, I can see how much I've lost. I'm now aware I can't do everything I used to be able to do. It was like she was coming back into the awareness of losing her capacity to function, losing her mind.
So she was grieving
And
in the process.
She was angry, and the fact that we could give her the opportunity to express it, that her husband was an absolute saint and well-grounded guy who could invite his wife to share that with him, not judge, but hold her and hold the experience of the grief. Incredibly important, because it helped her sustain her recovery that much easier.
Yes.
And be invested in getting better that much more.
And another reason why it's good for people to actually have a coach, because there are things that are going to come up, especially, if you are one of those people who haven't dealt with that. There are things that are going to come up, and it's not a smooth road always to healing. Sometimes you really have a lot of stuff comes up that you have to, like you say, you have to admit, you have to give some things up. And for a lot of people, that's not easy.
Loss of control is such a profound thing. And, just to add the other ring, which is the family system.
Yeah.
And how
I was just about to say is community.
How this person is no longer fulfilling their role in the support of the system, of the family system. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. Why am I taking care of you? You're the mom.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Do your job.
Mm. Yeah, lots of different dynamics that really it's very helpful to have a coach to see you through that. Really.
Yeah. And, hopefully people don't need it because they're just using it to, feel better and be more relaxed and have a little more focus at work. And those people go on, carry on. If you want to optimize something, then I think it's better that you have some kind of guidance.
Yeah. Well, even if you think you don't have issues, that probably means that you have got issues and you're denying them. Nothing's wrong with me, Marvin. I don't need it. It's the others. It's just
classic.
The rest of them.
Everybody who's used that defense, raise their hand.
Yeah. Put your hands up.
Okay. This is great. I'm really glad.
This is so great, and I feel like there's so many more questions. We need to get you on the podcast again. So for anyone listening as well, I also want to encourage them to send through questions to us at Sarah Thrives. So if we have another episode with you, we can dive a little bit deeper into any of the topics we've started discussing today, because I know this is even just the beginning.
One more little thought is that in answer to the question of what can we do online for people, one of the things I'm going to be doing is working with a colleague of mine, Jacqueline Boone, and we're going to be providing both Feldenkrais awareness through movement and something called solvents and glue, which will be audio and video online classes that people can participate in to help with this issue of gravity and alignment and relaxation, but from a movement perspective and organizing movement. So we're going to put those together with the photobiomodulation.
Fantastic.
I'll keep you up on how that's going to happen.
Yes,
great,
please. Yeah.
But I have one last question. You have such fascinating and very valuable input in so many various areas of health, wellness, and just in general. I don't want not to put you on the spot, but if you could broadcast a message to people, even whether it's about cognitive wellness or just in general, that if someone that didn't know anything about health and wellness and they were kind of driving on the road and you could put a message on the billboard, what would you put?
Einstein was right. The solution to the problem is not something you find inside whatever you know about the problem. You have to look outside the problem area to find the answer.
Yeah. Okay.
Good one.
Leaning on him is, a safe bet.
You got to get growing up.
I brushed before we got on.
Oh, did you? Okay. We didn't get to Einstein, Marvin.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been so wonderful speaking with you. And could you tell us where people should find you?
Sure.
Or book a session with you.
The website is Quiet Mind, and then the letters F as in Frank, D as in dog, N as in Nancy for foundation.org. And you can reach me at info@quietmindfdn.org.
Great. We'll put the links.
That should do it.
And
Fantastic.
also now you do have your page on our website, so you can also come through Sarah Thrive.
That's right.
Because we do have you as a Sarah coach, and people can book to see you straight on there as well. So either way works to contact Marvin. You can come through. Of course, we'll put you in touch with Marvin.
Yeah, and you've got that rumpled professor picture of me.
Yeah, we got that authoritative one that kind of will make people behave themselves. That, Marvin.
So listen to the podcast first. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Okay, guys.
So we can set this Marvin on you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Breaking the gray.